Yes, yes. Welcome back, guys. Well, on Tuesday, July 6th, Minister of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport, the Honorable Olivia Grange, made a statement to the House of Representatives regarding adjustments to the sexual harassment bill. A key player in this process is Professor Opal Palmer, University Director of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, and she's on Zoom to discuss the points presented. Hello, Prof.
Hello, it's wonderful to be here and to see you both.
Oh, thank you very much. It's good to have you. Harris, are you going to take it?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I mean, lots of things to discuss, but I want to focus on the critical areas. Well, let's start with who are the stakeholders who are involved in the decision process? We see it in the House of Representatives, but how does it get there?
Well, one of the good things about the sexual harassment bill is that the Minister of Gender and had sent out a wide invitations for various stakeholders to weigh in on the sexual harassment bill. And I thought that was very important and necessary. So there was a wide, diverse cross-section of stakeholders, including the Institute for Gender and Development Studies at the University of the West Indies, and a lot of other CEOs who were invited to review the bill and to make recommendations. So, and I think this is why we now have what we have, because we've had all of those important participants looking at the bill and making considerable and serious recommendations to amend it.
Okay, so where are we with this bill now, Prof? Because it's a very, very important bill that we need to be ratified,
put in, rolling out.
Yes. And a lot of people feel like, can we get on with it already? But we know how these processes go.
Right, and we're doing everything we can, and a number of other stakeholders are doing everything they can to ensure that this year the sexual harassment bills gets passed. But I want to talk about some of the specific recommendations that we and others made that I think makes this bill a very fair gender equity, gender equality bill that looks at sexual harassment in a much wider cross-section than the workplace, what we normally know as the workplace, because in Jamaica, as we know, there are many informal workplaces, and that was one of the considerations and some of the considerations that we wanted to deal with. So yes, we are hoping, we are very fingers crossed that this will in fact become law by the end of this year or before the end of this year. And then, of course, as you know, something gets enacted, but there needs to be a procedure to roll it out, and we need to have insurance that these things will be adhered to. We have to educate the public. There has to be a large, important part of this is really to educate the public.
Yep, absolutely.
What is sexual harassment and what are the ramifications for both companies, small or large, as well as the general public.
So workplaces now where? Because we're thinking office and that's what comes to your mind first. But you're making a recommendation that workplace be looked at on a broader scale.
Right. So, one of the things, Shirley Price from the domestic workers was very much vocal in terms of household workers.
Absolutely.
And what that space inquires, and that is not just the employees, but people who come to work, who come to the household, who oftentimes victimize household workers. So whereas all of the wider landscape that we would like is not necessarily addressed, but there are those considerations for that, for schools, for instance, for other public institutions, clinics and hospitals and things like that, which are very important, and particularly for the protection of our children, that school and the spaces that they occupy are considered, and there are rules and regulations governing those kinds of spaces.
Absolutely. And so some of the recommendations that you would have made for inclusion in the bill?
Well, one of the important things for me and for many of us was that initially the bill said you only had 12 months to report it.
Right.
Well, based on all of the psychological evidence we have, we know that oftentimes it takes many, many years for people to get brave enough and feel empowered enough after they've been victimized to report it. We had advocated for 10 years, we have 6 years, and we're good with that. 6 years is reasonable, particularly for the context of Jamaica. And so that for us was an important win, so that victims, women, men, whomever, have that time to recover, to feel empowered to make those claims.
Yeah, one of the things and a critical area is the recommendation for the institution of a sexual harassment policy statement, vital to every organization and so on. Is this policy statement going to be provided by the committee, or are you hoping that organizations will come up with their own?
Well, they're going to be having a template because we understand, depending on the size of the organization, that would be very, very difficult necessarily for people to draft something from scratch. Mm-hmm. So they will be provided with a template that they can modify to based on their company. Now, the University of the West Indies, and we've had a sexual harassment policy since, I think, 1992. We're in this process of upgrading it and making sure that the processes and the procedures work. Because as you know, you have a policy, but then there has to be processes and procedures and implementation. And this is where we tend to fall down. So no, companies will not have to start from scratch. They will be given a template mm-hmm. that they can then modify and curtail for their specific companies.
Let's talk about the confidential register.
Yes, big, especially in Jamaica where we see, nobody seems to keep things confidential. But that is also important because we need to have a record. What we have found, what the data will suggest, what the data supports, is that they're oftentimes repeat offenders. So someone does victimize someone and the company dismisses them, they go to somewhere else and they do it again. What a registry will do is provide documentation on repeat offenders, and therefore it hopefully will serve to let them seek help or amend their ways. But it's important at this time in place when we have so much sexual act of violence against all kinds of people, all kinds of persons, that we establish a registry. And again, the confidentiality of that is going to be important. That's something we're going to have to grapple with. One of the discussions is that it can be housed similarly like employee documents are housed in HR, that HR persons would be trained and it would be managed there. And certainly for smaller companies, that would be the most adequate place for that kind of data to be maintained. But it's important that we keep a record so we know what is happening and we know what amendments need to happen.
Doc, so much more to discuss, but I'm glad we were able to narrow in on the critical areas. It's a dialogue that we have to continue here in Jamaica amongst all offices. One of the members of the House of Representatives said it's going to require a culture change, mm-hmm. Not just in reporting, but in also understanding what sexual harassment means mm-hmm. and so on. Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you, Prof, always, for speaking with us.
And yes, the big thing will be the cultural change, rolling out an educational program so that everyone is on board and understand what needs to happen and what shifts we need to make.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Seismic shifts. Professor Opal Palmer-Adisa, yes. University Director of the Institute of Gender and Development Studies. Coming up next, a rewind interview on the attitudes of singledom. Interesting. We'll be right back with that.